Thank you very much for joining us here today in Baku, and welcome to those joining us online by the live stream on this panel discussion on the role of social protection in terms of the global goal on adaptation. The importance of scaling up ambition for climate change adaptation has never been more obvious than in these recent years. Around the world, we have watched as people and their livelihoods and health have been impacted by floods, storms, droughts, and extreme heat waves. Social protection can be a lifeline for people in such cases, while at the same time it can support human development and people's adapting capacities. It was recognized by the presidency-led Baku Principle on Human Development for Climate Resilience that were adopted yesterday. So the role of social protection vis-à-vis climate change and for enabling a transition towards low-carbon, resilient economy is really gaining traction around the spaces of this COP29 and in related processes. It's also important to remember that we took important strides in this regard last year. At COP28, parties explicitly referenced the need for adaptive social protection for all to reduce the impact of climate change on poverty and livelihoods, which was defined as one of the 7 thematic targets for reaching the global goal on adaptation that was established by the Paris Agreement in 2015. We are currently in the middle of a 2-year work program on developing indicators to measure progress towards these targets, which makes this an opportune moment to reflect on the role that social protection can play in the global goal on adaptation, and also to measure the progress that we are making in that regard. This discussion is also very timely for another reason. We are increasingly seeing the importance of adaptation and resilience being reflected and recognized in the discussions of the Just Transition Work Programme. The ILO guidelines for a just transition were very clear about the fact that a just transition is not just about leveraging opportunities and managing impacts of the shift toward low-carbon economy, but it's also about delivering improved adaptations in terms of livelihoods, workers, communities, and enterprises. The principles of decent work, labor rights, and leaving no one behind are in fact fundamental for supporting workers and communities affected by climate change, as they are relevant when speaking about the energy transition. It is my pleasure now to introduce my colleague, Jana Bischler from the ILO, who works on the link between social protection and climate change, and who will kick us off with a very brief scene-setting presentation. We'll then turn to our panel discussions, and I will introduce our panelists just in a moment. Jana, please come over and kick us off.
Thank you very much, Camilla, for this introduction. I will keep it very, very brief, but I just wanted to very quickly set the scene first of all, talking about what is social protection actually, right? Because we get this question quite a lot among the climate community. And social protection is basically around ensuring income security and access to healthcare without financial hardship across a person's life. Right? So this is in childhood, in working age, and in old age. And we all face these risks across the different spaces in our lives. That might be a childhood where, you know, children especially are prone to poverty and working age, when people might be forming a family. You know, there's the role of maternity benefits. People might be losing their jobs, so there's the need for unemployment protection. People might have a disability that they need to, income support for, and then of course in old age. And cross-cutting, there's general social assistance, which is for people living in poverty, as well as social health protection, right? And both of these things can be done either through a contributory system, which we also sometimes call social insurance. This is your health insurances, contributory pensions, and so on, or through non-contributory means, which is, you know, people often speak about cash transfers, cash benefits for different vulnerable groups. So, and without, you know, taking a lot of detail, I just wanted to show a few examples for how social protection contributes to reducing vulnerability, enhancing resilience, and adaptive capacities. for us to get a little bit of a feel of how all of this works, essentially, right? So the first example is from Ghana, where a very recent study has actually shown that women, especially those in poor communities that are exposed to extreme heat while they're pregnant, have a much higher likelihood of giving birth to children with low birth weight, which of course is really bad for their later development and hence their adaptive capacities. But where they actually have access to cash benefits while pregnant, they are much less likely to be impacted by extreme heat and have these consequences. In Malawi, for example, we have seen that access to a public works program reduces the financial constraints and encourages risk-taking in adopting climate-smart agricultural practices among rural farmers. Brazil recently had massive floods in the south of the country, and they actually leveraged their whole social protection system in order to provide additional support to people that were affected. For example, they advanced pension payments, they advanced payments for people with disabilities. They added over 20,000 households into their Bolsa Familia program, which is the famous sort of cash benefit support for vulnerable households with children. They extended unemployment benefits by an additional 2 months, and they allowed workers to access their severance accounts to get further support as they were impacted by the floods. And then another example from Algeria that has, for example, adapted their unemployment insurance scheme for workers in the construction sector so that on days of extreme heat, they can actually get this wage replacement so that they don't have to work and don't have to choose between their health and actually managing to earn a wage, right? So these are just lots of different examples, and the main point here that I want to make is that, first of all, the contribution of social protection to adaptation goes beyond emergency cash assistance, right? The social protection system is really a good opportunity to channel this cash assistance, but as we've seen, it's also fundamental in addressing the causes, the root causes of vulnerability that people are facing, right? As we've seen in some of these examples. And some of these root causes really are poverty, inequality, and a lack of decent work, right? And the other point I want to make, which is especially relevant for the global goal on adaptation that has lots of different targets, including on health, food security, infrastructure, and so on and so forth, is that social protection really, it's important to achieve the target on poverty and livelihoods, but it actually also contributes to the achievement of the other targets, because as we've seen in the example of Ghana, social protection helps to support food security. As we've seen in the example of Algeria, it helps to, reduce the impacts of climate change on health. So it's really this sort of very cross-cutting piece that can help us achieve adaptation targets. And before we hand over to our panel, I just wanted to quickly point out, because we're talking about indicators, right, and how we can measure this progress, that the ILO for many, many years has been supporting countries in collecting statistics and data on social protection coverage. And we publish this every 2 to 3 years in the World Social Protection Report, the latest edition having been released in September. And I want to start with the good news, which is that we are making progress. So while we've seen that in 2015, only about 43% of the world's population had access to at least one social protection benefit, within the last 8 years, we've managed to achieve this by 10 percentage points. This means something is happening, but we also know that the impacts of climate change are growing, and so the progress is at the same time not fast enough. And the last point that I want to end with is to say that the coverage in the countries most vulnerable to climate change is the lowest, right? So this is the big paradox of climate change, of course, yeah, that we see in all the other areas. The countries that are most affected are the least prepared and have the lowest coverage of social protection. So for example, we see that in the 50 most vulnerable countries, only 25% of the population has access to at least one social protection benefit. And in the 20 most vulnerable countries, it's only about 9%, right? So as Camilla said, I think this inclusion and this recognition of social protection for achieving adaptation goals that we're seeing in the Global Goal on Adaptation, in the Baku Principles, is a really important step into the right direction, but we have a lot of work to do. And I'm really looking forward to hearing different perspectives from our panel now on what this means, how it works in different countries, what it might mean for the indicators, and also what the perspective of our workers is on this issue. Thank you so much.
Many thanks, Jana, for getting us started on this with those initial points for reflections that we are hoping that will be articulated and reflected upon by our esteemed panel. And we are very lucky to have with us a wide range of key actors promoting social protection in the context of climate change adaptation. And I'd like to invite them over to the stage. So we have Mr. Momodou Dibba, who is a national coordinator of the National Social Protection Secretariat from the Gambia. Mr. Momodou, please go ahead and join us here. We have Mrs. Nguyen, who is Deputy Director General, Department of Science and Technology, Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development, Vietnam. Mrs. Tu, join us on stage. Mrs. Catherine Simonet, Climate Change Adaptation Expert, AFD, and an expert that is selected by the UNFCCC to support the program on indicators under the GGGA. Catherine, welcome. And finally, Quitain Hernandez, Director of Communication and Advocacy at the International Trade Union Confederation of Asia Pacific. Please join me in welcoming our panelists on stage. In this first part of the discussion, we'd like to ask your perspective on a number of topics that are particularly relevant for the organization that you come from. And as you will see, we are going to be reflecting both on the global processes, so for instance, the relevance of the global goal on adaptation and what discussions are happening there, but also what's happening at the country level. I think there are a lot of calls in this COP to say we need to translate commitment into actions on the ground. So I think it's important that we keep sight on both things. So first of all, I'd like to ask you, Mr. Momodou, let me start with you. It's very encouraging to see that heads of national social protection agencies like you are actively following international climate change negotiations. I can say that it's not that common, but it's great really to bring together different actors within the government to address climate change impacts in a way that is coherent and in a way that leverages different policy instruments. So I'd like to ask you if you could describe the progress that the Gambia has made in better linking social protection with climate change adaptation, including through your NDC and through your national adaptation plans. The second aspect that it would be great to hear from you about is the significance of an explicit reference to social protection under the global goal of adaptation. Over to you, Mr. Momodou.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a pleasure once again to be part of this discussion. In terms of the contribution of social protection to climate change, I have my favorite line that I always like to make. We all agree that the impacts of climate change is already on us. We will have floods, we will have windstorms, we will have drought. And I always say once this impact hit, it is the social protection endeavors that are in the forefront, not the climate actually institutions that are in the forefront to help the individuals. Now, with respect to the Gambia, our approach to addressing to use social protection as a measure against climate change is based on the principle of adaptive social protection. Of course, the building blocks of an adaptive social protection is about the programs, the finance for the programs, the data and information system, and the delivery mechanisms. So as far as the Gambia is concerned, these are the building blocks we are concentrating on building, and our hope is that we are able to use the building blocks of an adaptive social protection to respond to the impacts of climate change. Because anytime it happened, we already know who is where they are, and in which vulnerable communities. And it's usually easier to scale up your interventions to address these issues. Now, with regards to the second question, the inclusion of social protection measures in the target, as far as I am concerned, sets the policy direction at the global level. And at the national level, we are expected to nationalize or mainstream this global direction into our national policies. Next year, we will start working on our NDC and, of course, on our national adaptation plan. Our hope is that both in our NDC and also in our national adaptation plans, we mainstream social protection interventions as key adaptive mechanisms to cope with the impacts of climate change. So building an effective social protection system, in our view, is one of the main adaptive measures that can be taken in place. Because as you know, we cannot avoid some of the impacts now, but we can prepare people to cope with them before they come, during the crisis and after the crisis. And that's what an adaptive social protection gives us. And we are well on the way on that. And for the information of the audience, by the end of December, we will be one of the first countries to have a nationwide social registry, which covers the entire population. So it's one of the tools we will use to be able to respond to the impacts of climate change, because then we already know all the households in the country and their socio-economic status.
Thank you very much, Mr. Momodou. I think some very important reflections there. I think one key message that I get from you is that social protection system need to be at the forefront in terms of dealing with climate change impact, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Also in terms of sustainability, we should leverage what we have, because these allow us to have a systematic approach and really reach those that need it and those that are impacted by climate change. So thanks very much for those reflections, and I think it's also helping us to think how things work on the ground beyond these global level discussions that nonetheless help setting some direction. Let me turn over to you, Mrs. Tu. Vietnam recently experienced a superstorm and faced many vulnerabilities when it comes to climate change. At the same time, your country has made some impressive progress in extending social protection coverage. So I'd like to ask you how you see the importance of social protection in reducing the impacts on poverty and livelihoods in Vietnam, and also what might be the priorities in Vietnam in terms of linking social protection and climate change adaptation looking ahead.
Thank you for inviting me to represent Vietnam in this session today. And as you mentioned, we were just hit by Yagi typhoon, which is the one event happened in 30 to 40 years. So which cost Vietnam about 340 lives and a damage of more than $3 billion US. So that is, we show clearly the impact of the climate change on our society and our economy. And you want we experience that you're right about that the social protection in Vietnam is much better than before. And as I experienced in my generation, we don't have a kind of unemployment assistance, something like that. But my children now, they can have some, when they want to change their jobs, they can have unemployment assistance. That is, I think, is very important. It is show that our social protection has been improved much better than before. And as for the reduce to contribute to the reduce the impact and of the climate change and contributes to support the people impacted by the climate change. I think the social protection is very important in helping people not only just transition but also facing and cope with effectively with the impact of this of the climate change for the, like loss in natural disaster, like in loss job loss, and also that in the climate change impact, the most of the people affected is the minority group and the vulnerable group. So the social protection there is very crucial to help them to deal with those problems and also help them to start a new life, a new stage. That is, I see that is very important of social protection in Vietnam. We also have we have both social protection in terms of social insurance and social assistance, but the social insurance is can help for cover about 40% of the working age labor force. But for the vulnerable, we just that social assistance just covers just have only 4% of the population. That is the point that we need to reform and to improve the social protection in Vietnam.
Many thanks, Mrs. Tu. I think the message on the importance of strengthening social protection system is really key, because as we see increasing impacts for climate change, the only kind of sustainable and systemic solution is really to look at those institutions, at those programs, at those systems, and making sure they're fit for purpose and they reach everyone. It's a social protection for all that is key to climate, to contributing to address climate change. Joy, we stay with you on Asia, in fact, and as part of the ITUC Asia Pacific, a regional network of trade unions that cover over 36 countries, we'd like to hear your perspective from a region that is so vulnerable to climate change. And in particular, I'm going to ask you how you see the contribution of social protection in supporting resilience of workers and livelihoods to the impacts of climate change and their role in contributing to a just transition. I would also like to ask you to reflect on what are the demands of workers when it comes to social protection in the context of climate change responses.
Thank you, Camilla. And yes, I will start with emphasizing that my region is very much vulnerable to climate change. My country in particular, the Philippines, in 1 month, we have experienced 6 typhoons. 4 in 10 days. So imagine that. It has affected 1.8 million people. In Nepal, a couple of months ago, a flooding has resulted in 200 people dying. In Pakistan, the month before that, many workers have been affected with the intense flooding. Domestic workers, for example, couldn't go to their employer's house and do their work, losing their income. But not only that, their care work is affected as well. And there were even reports that many mothers actually gave birth during this intense flooding. So what I'm trying to say is that climate change issue is a matter of survival for many workers in the region, especially countries that are very vulnerable to its impacts. And given that climate change is a matter of survival, we think that social protection could actually be a lifeline to navigate the complex impacts of climate change on the lives of workers. Of course, Jana, in her presentation, already mentioned the important role of social protection in addressing different vulnerabilities as well as contingencies that we experience in our life cycle. But we have to accept the fact and the reality that climate change is here with us right now. And in Asia Pacific, the social protection systems that are existing are not equipped enough to cover these types of contingencies and vulnerabilities. In fact, again, as mentioned by Jana in her presentation, most of the countries in Asia Pacific are excluding a large segment of population in social protection systems because most of the working population in the region are in the informal economy. And women are also very much overrepresented in this economy. So in terms of the demands for social protection from the workers, we want social protection that ensure income security, access to healthcare, climate-specific measures such as compensation for lost work hours, injuries, and of course, loss of lives due to extreme weather events, as well as protection from climate-induced occupational hazards. for workers in the region, social protection is critical, not only in terms of just transition, mitigation, but also in the case of adaptation and loss and damage. I would also like to highlight that we as trade unions are also in the front lines in responding to climate change impacts. When the flooding happened in Nepal, our affiliates are the ones who initiated firsthand the rescue operations, not only of the members, but also other members of their communities. Our affiliate SEWA introduced a heat wave insurance so that when temperature exceed a certain level, around 43 degrees if I'm not mistaken, for three consecutive days, then they will be entitled to a certain amount of heat wave insurance. It might be a small amount, but it is an amount that could help home-based workers, women workers working in the middle of the heat to augment their income, or find some comfort from that small amount. And if the temperature exceeds or in the same level up to the fourth day, there will be an additional amount. And this is unconditional. This is just to really, make life better, even in small ways among women workers. In Fiji, our trade unions were able to negotiate for paid leaves, especially for long-term leaves resulting from evacuation from typhoons and monsoons, especially in villages that get submerged from floods during monsoon season. In Sri Lanka, tea plantation workers were able to bargain for better occupational health and safety measures to respond to landslides. So what I'm trying to say is that as trade unions, we're also trying to respond to these measures, but it is also, I would say, a mechanism. We are fighting for a mechanism through social dialogue of including trade unions in the process of developing social protection measures, integrating social protection in national adaptation plans, because we are already in the front lines. We know what's happening among the workers, especially in vulnerable regions. Thank you.
Many thanks, Joy, for that. Obviously, many important messages there, but one reflection that comes through is the value of involving workers' organizations in discussions related to social protection and adaptation, because I don't know what the audience thinks, but I think the way you articulated the impacts of climate change on different types of workers and the level of granularity that you bring really shows that you have a very close connection with the workers that are on the front line. And I think there are very important contributions that can be made to informing social protection systems that are fit for purpose, and they address this variety of challenges that different workers face vis-a-vis climate change. Let me now turn over to you, Catherine. I'd like to go back to the issue of the global goal on adaptation. You're one of the experts selected by the UNFCCC to be on the work program on indicators development under the UAE Belém work program. I'd like to ask you specifically on the measures that can be taken. So can you tell us a little bit more on the types of social protection indicators that are being considered so far? And in your opinion, what is the potential for making use of existing indicators of social protection, such as the SDG indicator that we heard about earlier?
Thank you. Thank you very much. So to start, I think that, and echoing a bit Jana's presentation, I think we have a common agreement that social protection is contributing to just transitions, but also to adaptation, and this has to be more and more highlighted. Your examples were really clear on that. So the conviction that social protection is contributing to reducing poverty and inequality, that are such of key drivers for climate vulnerability, the fact that we can design social protection that is responsive to climate shocks is also something that is important and need to be highlighted in order to support vulnerable households in case of climate-related shocks, and also the dimension that the social contribution, the social protection can contribute to socio-ecological resilience and risk reduction by building adaptation behaviors along with this support. So I'm just taking my AFD hat for 5 seconds, saying that at AFD there is a conviction that social protection is contributing to adaptations, and actually there is a huge need for climate finance and climate adaptation finance on these areas. AFD is contributing to adaptive social protection, the World Bank adaptive social protection in Mauritania, along with Denmark, UK and Germany support, so, and also working in Philippines on the national adaptive social protection mechanisms. So just saying that climate finance has to go along also on this topic, and especially on adaptation finance. That is sometimes considered as non-sustainable or need to be not bankable, as we said. And I do think that with this example we can show the sustainability of such kind of climate finance. Going back to the expert group now, I'm changing my hat. So we've been 70 experts mobilized, and on these specific targets on livelihood and poverty, we are 7 experts, and I just would like to acknowledge my nice colleagues that are part of this group. So Professor Pramod Sikht, Valeria Nesterenko, Portia Williams, who's here, Dr. Dr. Lama Zagzag, Dr. Nego Amiru, and Dr. Hannah Olafstudier. So we've been 7 working on 391 indicators, precisely, that have been recognized to be contributing, or can be, contribute to this target on reducing poverty and livelihoods. I just did a quick check for this side event, and I've counted rapidly 39 indicators on social protection, but Portia, you can correct or complement if you want. So we received along 40 indicators on this domain. So I do think that it's a signal that there is a recognition that social protection mechanisms is key factors on these areas. Now, if you look a bit more in the detail, the kind of indicators are quite broad regarding social protection. So it comes to share of hazard-affected population reached by social protection, so something more about benefiting of social population benefiting of social protection, to share a proportion of population covered by social protection, to share of government spending on social protection, so more about the needs and the means, financial means that are mobilized for social protections. So I think that this point is important because at the moment we are still waiting, and there is ongoing global goal adaptation discussions and negotiations on our TOR as expert, I would say. And part of the main point will be about the mean of implementation. So should we include or not this means of implementation is still in discussion on the parties, so we are waiting for orientation on this point. I think the other point that is important for us is to have these indicators to be aggregable, and I think that it was really inspiring, Jana, the work you showed, that having such kind of indicators that are available at the country level and at the global level. It seems that orientation on the negotiations are going towards this direction, to ask us something that is aggregable at the highest level. I just also would like to highlight that the numbers of indicators will be also critical factors to know if we will be able to include such kind of indicator. So to date, negotiation, the text is about 4 indicators by target, but negotiations are speaking between 3 to 10 indicators per target. So let's see if social protection indicators will come up within these 3 to 10 indicators. On this aspect, I think that the experts are, to date, I'm speaking for myself, but maybe the colleague can complete, quite happy that we will have to organize a common methodology across target that will help us to make the prioritization on the indicators, and so we'll see what's coming up on these prioritizations, but the availability of the data and the availability of implementing these indicators and this calculation, I think, will be quite critical. And as you mentioned, the added value of social protection is to get all this registry, national registry, available, and so making this data at the national level already managed and partly available. So that is an argument for this to contribute. Just to mention also that the SDGs indicators on social protection is in this list of indicators, and is availability, is definition that is already really clear, are also pushing for it to be potentially selected.
Thank you. Catherine, can I just ask you, because I think we have a mixed audience, and probably online we also have an audience that sometimes is not so familiar with the technicalities of climate change negotiations. So can you just say a couple of words on why it's so important to have a global goal on adaptations with targets and indicators?
Yeah, I do think that this global goal on adaptation is helping the overall negotiation to move from an NCQG negotiation. So I'm sure you've heard about all the quantum discussion we have about the finance, to results and outcome. And I do think that it's a critical move, especially on adaptation, because we can show up more the results beyond the mean of implementation. Look, what does that mean for people? And I think you've been really clear on this. We are speaking at the end about making people more resilient to climate shocks and risks, and that is good that there is all this discussion on mobilization of climate finance, of course, but more we will be precise on the progress we are making in terms of building resilience, more it will be useful to and a leverage for mobilizing finance. So I think this is the overall aim of the adaptation, the global goal on adaptation, and then within this global goal on adaptation, 10 targets have been selected, and I will not say that it's the most important, but also I'm working on it. So I do think the poverty one is quite critical, because we are speaking exactly about what people need when they are the most vulnerable to climate change and poor, and most of the time also marginalized in their country. So I do think that it's a critical element, and that's why it's also a part of difficult negotiations between countries and party, because it's all about where we are now in terms of results, what have been delivered and what we can deliver over the next years.
Thank you very much. I think when we talk about climate ambition, having this people-centered approach is really key. So I think the global goal on adaptation and these indicators that really talk about reaching people are an essential tool to get there. Let me now turn over to the audience, and we'd like to ask if you've got questions, but also if you've got reflections and observations, to please join the conversation. Yes.
Thank you very much, moderator, and I'm very happy for this beautiful discussion. And with me, I'm Renato Mbamilo from Tanzania, working with the Association of Tanzania Employers, but I'm linked with the International Organization of Employers. And in this discussion, I would like to, I think, like 2 more indicators I would like to add from the previous speaker. And this is to do with budget allocation for social protection. I remember you spoke about it, but with me, I want to emphasize on budget disbursement. In our country, especially from developing countries, our perspective, a budget can be allocated in our parliaments, but the disbursement to reach into the specific coffers, sometimes it is a challenge. And when especially these climate-related shocks happen, the institutions fail to address or even attend the victims because they don't have the money. So budget disbursement is quite important. And just to add to that is the point of responsiveness of these institutions, especially when these climate-related shocks happen. How quick are these institutions to attend the victims? And this really need to be looked upon, and people need to speak about it and to work on it, so our institutions change and they become responsive enough to these shocks. But I would like to add a few points from my country, Tanzania, regarding the social protection. Currently, we have some institutions already in place as a means to address these social climate-related issues. However, our legislations have not stipulated quite clearly like the climate-related shocks. You see, they are a bit general. And now currently we are reviewing our social security legislations, and the Association of Tanzania Employers is actively participating in that process. And with us, so we are making sure that these issues related to climate even being considered. We are trying to push from our end that they become quite clear. They are categorically stated. So when it comes to need, we know where to stand and speak about it or raise our voices. But again, as employers, employers are ready to support, especially one of our legislations is on workers' compensation fund, where employers contribute about 0.5% of the total wage bill on monthly basis, and this covers all the employees who get victim employees from a workplace due to various perils, including climate-related. And yes, I wanted to add something on that similar to this. Yes. Especially from this year, we have been focusing on informal economy, and this for quite long. We have been speaking of the employed people. When we speak of employment, we speak of the employed people, the employers, but those who are self-employed and are less considered, especially in all these social protection mechanisms. And I can tell you, especially from the developing countries, the informal sector contributes the largest section in our economies. You see? So the majority of our people are employed, are self-employed, and they are not very much covered in our existing legislations, especially when it comes to social protection. So we have discovered that, and we have already set our motion, and we are now pushing for this also to be considered. And I would urge others as well to speak and advocate for these other self-employed people who are the majority, especially from our world, and have no one to speak about them. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much for those reflections. I think very important. We heard from the point of view of workers' organization and what they can bring to the table, their perspective, how they can inform policy dialogue on how to strengthen social protection system for adaptation. The same holds true for employers' organization, and I think it's also very commendable what you mentioned about the informal sector. I think we know that especially in developing countries, the majority of the workforce is in the informal economy, and they face very specific challenges when it comes to social protection coverage. So if we are talking about facing up to climate change impact, the concerns of informal sector workers have to be really front stage in this regard. Thank you very much for that. Are there any other comments, questions, inputs from the floor? Yes, we've got... you're going to have to come a bit closer. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. I just wanted to add a bit in terms of comments to say that having heard some of the very practical discussions going on and examples given, it's very important to say that social protection is very, very key when we talk about climate impacts from a developing country point of view. To the point that when you hear some of these examples, you know that without social protection, I don't know where to put it. And then linking it to maybe the global goal on adaptation, then we cannot even achieve that, because it is through social protection now when some of these impacts happen. We can talk about adaptive capacities, and we can talk about improving resilience. And so it makes it very, very important, and if not even one of the most important targets we have in there for the global goal on adaptation. And to link and add a bit to what my colleague Catherine said already, a point with what I'm saying with the developing country context is that we also heard that it's very much in the informal setting. And so it makes data a very big challenge when we talk about connecting social protection to the work of experts with the global goal on adaptation. And so maybe coming from a point I raised just earlier before coming here is the fact that looking at the work going on with the experts, it will be very important, and probably ILO comes in to link up very much with relevant institutions. Because if you look at the discussions going on, even with the negotiations now, it means that with whatever criteria we are given already, we need to make sure we are going to further refine. And so data becomes very key. And for something like social protection and listening to the discussions now, and very much of the informal setting, we would have to leverage on some of what is sources that are existing already in terms of data. And so again, because with the GJA, we are saying we don't want to put reporting burden on countries. So we might have to leverage on where we can get very good data sources. And I think that is why probably ILO would come in very strongly in this. And experts probably might have to, moving forward, consider engaging relevant institutions to make sure that we can all kind of collaboratively come up with something that at the global level we will all be proud of. I think this is something I wanted to add on. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry. No, thank you. It was really interesting discussion, and I agree with everything you say, and really interesting examples from the informal workers and the Gambia and Vietnam and workers' organisation, and of course Catherine's and your work on the adaptive indicators, which is in the expert group. Just to add one comment, I'm following a lot of discussions on migration and internal displacement and workers moving seasonally and circularly and all that. Domestic workers and informal workers, and I'm just hoping that there's also space to be inclusive and ensure that there's space in the discussions where we can not just think of houses as static, that people can move, and it wouldn't stop them, or it would either help them move if they want to move, or it wouldn't stop them, that they'd be off the registry. But I suppose the first part is getting the registries up and running, and then ensuring that we're able to use them in other locations. Thank you. I'm sorry, my name's Una Murray from the University of Galway. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's important we take into account the specific needs of different groups, right? And I think we've been articulating this throughout the discussion. Are there any further observations or reflections before we turn back to the panel?
I want to just mention one more challenge is that the social protection in Vietnam has faced with it is social protection is yet to be leveraged as powerful for crisis management and disaster responses, being often too slow. Too slow in level is too slow and small in scale to help with those people in needs and in timely manner. That's our experiences in the last typhoon Yagi. It is shows that it underlines the limitation of the need to continue the reform and improvement of our social protection system as further disaster are likely to be happened. So that is also the challenge to the social protection in system in Vietnam. So just not only just transition, but also helping people with adaptation and mitigation efforts. So it's also a challenge.
Thank you very much for sharing that. In fact, now I would like to turn back to the panels. I think you heard a few different perspectives coming from the floor. Do you have any reactions, any observations to those points that were raised on the informal sector, on the issue of migrants and internally displaced people and refugees? So over to you. Who would like to start? Joy.
I'll start because the microphone is close to me. But yeah, maybe a response on institutional responses. In the Philippines, for example, sometimes the NGOs are quicker to respond, again, because they're in the front lines compared to local government authorities. But we as ITUC also try to exchange with other global union federations, and one of the recommendations that came from Public Services International is that when we talk about just transition, for example, we always talk about creation of new jobs in the new sectors such as the renewables. But according to them, one thing that we should also think about, especially coming from climate vulnerable countries, is how to use this opportunity to create new jobs also in disaster response and management, especially public sector jobs in those areas, because we need that definitely, especially in climate vulnerable countries. Second, on the issue of the informal economy, indeed, I couldn't agree more. We really have to cover more and more the informal economy in the discussions, but also, of course, in the actual social protection systems. As I mentioned earlier, they are often excluded from it, and most women are in there. And though not only we want inclusive and universal social protection, but we also want it to be gender transformative, to make sure that women also get the social protection that responds to the gendered vulnerabilities that they face as well in the midst of the climate crisis. And the point on movement, there are different types of movement being facilitated, I don't know the right term, by climate change impacts. For example, one of the cases shared with us by our Bangladesh trade unions, who are here, by the way, is that there are cases when, when we talk about transitions because of climate change, we look at this in a positive way, but there are also many negative transitions that are happening, such as, for example, an agricultural worker in rural areas who get affected by droughts or by typhoons, and then will move to the city and will suddenly become a garment worker. And as a garment worker, facing again another precarious situation, not being paid minimum wages, occupational health and safety risks, and many other issues. So there are a lot of complexities in this matter, and I think in the whole course of this climate displacement, moving from one precarious situation to another, there has to be targeted measures and support, because as I said, social protection is a lifeline. I wouldn't even call it as a safety net anymore, because as I said, it's a matter of survival.
Thank you very much, Joy. Catherine.
Yeah, so maybe to highlight the fact that we are under a process of this selection. So I do think that we all shared this idea that social protection is contributing to adaptation and has certainly a place under the global goal on adaptation, but our methodology is not yet setting up, and so this will be based on this methodology of selection of the existing indicators, where we can see there is already a lot of indicators that we will be able to say how this social protection will stand under the global goal on adaptation, if and how, let's say. But I think that the all about the feasibility, what Portia mentioned, is really important. So at the end, one of our main criteria will be, is these indicators feasible in terms of calculation, and to which rely the burden of the calculations. So I do think that this is quite critical and will be part of our methodology, of course. So can we really take these indicators into account, and can we really report on it? And of course, we have a really short calendar and timeline on this, so you should be fixed quite soon, because regarding the current conversation, we should come up with methodology really soon, and so with selected indicators by March. So that should be like, you shouldn't have to wait too much for the answers. But yeah, I think this is a work coming up in the next months.
Thank you very much. Over to you. I think there was also some interesting point about delivery, and
yes.
then I remember that, so it would be great to hear your perspective on this or other issues.
Oh, okay. I would like to talk about 3 issues. First, to Jana's presentation, when he talked about social protection's response to climate. It's not only about providing the cash assistance in terms of natural disasters. So for me, it's investing in the social protection system. And investing in the social protection system allows you to respond, allows you to help people to cope before the crisis happens. And this is important because it allows you to know where the vulnerable households are and what kind of needs they have. Now, when you look at our National Social Registry, we give different dimensions about the households, their vulnerability to climate-related issues, there are food security issues. So you are able to prepare them for their most vulnerable need in case anything happens. And also the conversation of social protection moving towards the just transition is something I want to talk about. Now, you talk about reskilling and retooling people, but mostly the people affected with the transition are the low-skilled individuals, the poor. So in a just transition, you must ensure that the poor and the vulnerable are properly prepared to move into the next available job. And often this is a problem with the poor people in vulnerable communities. So the social protection system doesn't only help you to respond or prepare people in times of crisis, but it also allows them to build their skills to be able to adapt to the new green jobs that should be available. So this is extremely important. And the last one I want to talk about, when you looked at the presentation by Jana, in terms of coverage, it's very low. And when you dig deep into the reasons why it's very low, finance is central. And as far as I am concerned, once the global goals on adaptation has one of the key indicators as social protection, then the argument of climate finance flowing into social protection, mainstreaming social protection in climate discussions becomes very easy, because then it's a commitment that we have to fulfill. And of course, the main argument in the negotiation rooms have been means of implementation. And the means of implementation, as we know, are around finance, technology, and capacity building. And once social protection is recognized as an important pillar in terms of building adaptive capacity, we expect that whatever is agreed as part of the means of implementation, especially for finance, should also flow into social protection endeavors to build people's adaptive capacity. So as far as I am concerned, having good indicators on social protection, practical ones, on the ground are very important, because it will determine the feasibility of our ideas in terms of the resource mobilizing, both from the domestic point of view and also from the national point of view, from international point of view rather.
Thank you very much. I'm having a quick check on how we are doing with time. 1 minute, all right. All right, so we use this 1 minute and then we wrap up.
Well, thank you. No. Okay, okay. Thank you very much.
I think.
This is it goes to ILO, not to you. I mean, we have seen this and the importance of social protection and adaptation. And the interest is there, data is there, everything is there. Are you willing? I mean, what is the role of ILO in bringing people together, like international organizations like you, to lead this so that it becomes part of the globalization in the future? That's my question.
Thank you very much. Now I'm with 2 mics, and we've got 1 minute. So let me just give a quick response on that, and then we wrap up this very rich discussion. So at the ILO, as you know, we've been working for a long time on social protection. We work in different ways. We work on global knowledge and data, and I think Jana shared some insights there. But we also work with countries to provide technical assistance on strengthening social protection system to be able to contribute to a people-centered climate change adaptations for workers, for households, for communities. So there is a number of ways we do that. One of them is a new tool we have, which is a social protection and climate change diagnostics that allows to map out what are the hotspots, let's say, in terms of needs for the country when it comes to social protection for climate change adaptation and the transition. And then making recommendations and working with constituents through social dialogue in terms of improving and making the social protection system working for all in facing up to the challenges of climate change. And I'm sure we'll be happy to have some side conversations on that. I'd like to really express my appreciation for what has been a very rich discussions. I think there's many takeaways, but one of them is the importance of looking at social protection in a systemic way when it comes to its contributions to climate change adaptations. We are not just talking about the ability to respond to shocks, and I think that's still very important, but we are also looking at social protection's role in terms of breaking those vicious circle between poverty and vulnerability, because that's really key. And I like the point about investment, and I think we should look at financing social protection as an investment in people, not as a burden or a spending and expenditure only. It's investing in people. And if we address this vicious circle between poverty and vulnerability, it's going to cost less than the cost of inaction. You know, it's going to be lower than the cost of inaction. So we should really reflect on the importance of investing people and investing in social protection system. At the ILO, with the accelerator for jobs and social protection, we are also looking increasingly at social protection role in climate change adaptation and the transition itself, and we are very happy to have side conversations on this to go forward. So thank you very much. Please join me in saying thanks to the panel with a round of applause.